Okay, well, I'm jumping into some territory that may make people feel uncomfortable. Of course, that wouldn't be the first time, right? This is going to be about radical Christianity. And it doesn't really matter if you're Christian or how you feel about Christianity. You need to know something about the splits and divisions within Christianity and the alternatives to the typical Christian narrative that we often hear. Let's put it this way. If even Slavoj Žižek can get something from Christianity to help him build his own theories, I think we also can examine this religion, and maybe from a critical position, but also from a creative position, finding out what other people have seen in it that might be useful for our situation today. The authors of this book, which is entitled An Other Kingdom, Departing the Consumer Culture, are major players in a new type of Christianity, or maybe it would be safer to say a new take on Christianity, whose point of view allows us to see what has happened, especially in the United States, to the religion in a way that might open up new spaces, new ways of thinking about those who tie up the religion with politics, particularly nationalistic politics, ultra-conservative politics, new ways of thinking about them, and also then, by contrast, new ways of thinking about Christianity as a position, a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at our place in the world and, what we ought to do, which is what political philosophy is all about. And these authors in this book, An Other Kingdom, kind of skirt between theology and political philosophy, which is very interesting. So I'll give you a very brief introduction to who these guys are coming from this book. First of all, Peter Block has a business background. He's not a theologian or a minister or anything like that, but he became very interested in building community in the 90s. And he's written several books, and as you move into, the current time frame, they're more and more about building community. From the book, it says that he's engaged in developing a civic engagement network called A Small Group, plus a series of other projects working on building the capacity of this urban community, that's Cincinnati, to value its gifts and to see its own possibility. His most recent work there is with Walter Brueggemann and others in the Economics of Compassion initiative of Greater Cincinnati. Walter Brueggemann is what I would call a heavy-hitting theologian. He's a major figure. His work tends to focus on the Old Testament. To say that this guy is prolific is a huge understatement. I don't know how he eats or sleeps or does anything else. Okay, on his website it lists 131 books that this guy has written. The last one is in 2019. It's A Glad Obedience. His first one was in 1968. He's 86 years old and he's still going all over the place, talking constantly. He was at the Jacques Ellul conference that took place earlier this year. Probably his most famous book is The Prophetic Imagination, which was published in 1978. And finally, John McKnight. He's worked in nonprofits and he's worked for government. He was the Midwest director of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And then he helped initiate a new department at Northwestern University called the Center for Urban Affairs. The university gave him a tenured professorship, even though he only had a bachelor's degree, which says something about the guy's talent and ability. He's the author of The Careless Society, Community, and Its Counterfeits, a classic critique of professionalized social services and a celebration of communities' ability to heal themselves from within. So I think, you see a commonality amongst all three of these fellows of a concern, a deep concern for community, neighborliness, what it takes to actually create a society in which people help each other rather than allow themselves to be exploited by the consumer culture. That's what this book is about. And it's profitable, I think, for anybody interested in kind of detaching a bit from the treadmill of consumerism, regardless of whether one is a Christian or a person of some faith or not. In the introductory chapter, Signs of the Times, they say, if we want to follow the signs of the times, we have to look at how our core economic beliefs have produced a culture that makes poverty, violence, ill health, and fragile economic systems seem inevitable. Economic systems based on competition, scarcity, acquisitiveness have become more than a question of economics. They have become the kingdom within which we dwell. Brueggemann is fond of using the word empire to describe the apparatus that we actually live under, and making the point that people either, in his view, more or less swear allegiance to empire as human power or to God, in which case they're at least partly living in an other kingdom, which is opposed to political power and domination. This book kind of riffs on that when it says that the so-called kingdom in which we dwell replicates the kingdom of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh's kingdom. And if you know anything from the Old Testament about Moses' battle with Pharaoh, Pharaoh had a lot of power, represented basically political power and wealth, and the ancient Jewish people eventually escaped Pharaoh's power to try to move to the promised land, right? They say it replicates the kingdom of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh's kingdom. It produces a consumer culture that centralizes wealth and power and leaves the rest wanting what the beneficiaries of the system have. But they say, and maybe rather hopefully, luckily, the exodus from a consumer globalized culture into a neighborly, localized, communal, and cooperative culture has begun. So all that from the preface, and then in the introduction they say, let's begin by describing the nature of the consumer kingdom. We live within a dominant cultural narrative best described as the free market consumer ideology. And I'm quoting here, free means that there should be few constraints on individuals and institutions. It signifies the elevation of individual rights. Market means that how we conduct commerce is a first priority. It is not just a place of buying and selling, it is a world view. It is touted as the essential element of democracy. Consumer means that our capacity to purchase is the measure of our well-being and our identity. What is essential to life, such as raising children, our health, our safety, our care, can be outsourced and purchased. Ideology means that our beliefs about free, about market, and about consumer are true, with a capital T, beyond question, expressions of our real nature. It's an ideology. They also call it a narrative, and they go on to explain that it is basically the water in which we swim, so it establishes the premises by which we live our lives and how we view our world, and we're not perhaps as aware of the fact that we are living in this narrative or this ideology as we ought to be, so that's what they're trying to bring more awareness to. And they say that they want to propose an alternative narrative that is founded on the ideas of neighborliness and covenant. Neighborliness means that our well-being and what really matters is close at hand and can be locally constructed or produced. They say it seems quaint and nostalgic to people to think in these terms, but yet there's a longing for that. They say to make neighborliness the center of our social order requires an act of imagination, and it is countercultural. And they say that covenant is different from contract. We think in terms of contract, and contract for many things, including those things that might better be supplied by family and friends, by each other at no or little cost. We contract by purchasing such things as child care, elder care, friendship, relationships, the food we eat, even our entertainment. Covenant is something closer to moral obligation or a sense of duty or responsibility. They say it's a part of sacred language. It includes words like covenant, vow, liturgy, re-performance, silence, mystery, infallibility. I guess what they're getting at there is that these words evoke something bigger out of people than the word contract or the contract mentality. They require more out of people, to give more, to grow more, to be bigger, to live life larger, I guess you might say, than the contract mentality allows. They dwell briefly here on our politics. They say we force all politicians into promising what they can't deliver. It becomes a concentrated version of the consumer ideology, citizen as consumer, candidate as supplier. And so we campaign and vote on marketing slogans: liberal, conservatives, values, democracies, end poverty, maintain standard of living, jobs, education, marriage this, guns that. So political campaigning becomes more like advertising and marketing. And that's of course, just a big theme in this book, that everything in society is organized around the principle of the market and of the contract mentality. Then in chapter 1, they focus in on the free market consumer ideology. They break it down into 4 pillars: scarcity, certainty, perfection, and privatization. Under scarcity, they say, well, the market operates best, or really operates solely on the idea that things are scarce, and the value of things goes up the more scarce they are. So scarcity is a deep belief. It's a deep part of our narrative, they say. We have to keep acquiring, and we think of that acquiring as relative to others. We don't want to be left behind. We don't want to be in a position where we don't have enough. They say grow or die characterizes this mentality. Here's a good quote about something that I've talked about in other videos from a different angle. They say agribusiness is the practice of scarcity. It's like a cancer cell which grows and grows until it destroys its host. Scarcity has the effect of destroying the host, the planet, and its ecology. Good farming is the practice of abundance. The soil becomes richer. It causes the land to generate more food for the neighborhood. So they, kind of tie that back into Christianity. They say theologically, what that means is if you practice abundance, God gives more, but if you practice the opposite, the implication is God gives less, because the natural world in this particular example is set up so that if it's taken care of well, it yields more over the long haul. But what agribusiness does is basically yield a lot more with a short-term view, with a sort of price tag hanging out in the future somewhere. They talk about certainty and perfection together. They say that the free market consumer ideology promises us a world of predictability and safety. And so it makes everyone work extremely hard for this supposed ideal state in which we can guarantee material satisfaction, the perfection of our technology. To stay still or to go backwards is considered a sign of death. You have to always be moving forward into that perfect state without perhaps thinking enough about whether the perfection we're seeking is going to actually end up making us feel more secure, making us happier, giving life more meaning. They talk about how this mentality makes it hard for people to accept the fact that nothing lasts forever, including life. They say, from this perspective, death is simply a medical failing, correctable over time. So, from my perspective, what they're getting at there is that there's this enlightened mentality latent in our cultural narrative that basically believes that onward and upward forever. Absolutely nothing is insurmountable, and that human beings can control everything or will eventually, even overcoming death itself. Planetary risks, they say, from this Enlightenment perspective, will be solved by technology. it's sort of like they're talking about accelerationism there too, right? The idea that, if technology has caused some problems, but we can always develop new and better technology. There's no problem we can't get out of. We just need to ramp up our technological development. Anyway, I take it that they think this is a fantasy and a story that is causing us to develop in ways that are destructive to ourselves and our environment. And finally, privatization. They say that the free market mentality is addicted to privatization. If it's not a business, like for instance, if it's school, if it's government, if it's church, whatever it may be, we have to make it look like a business. We need to have it operate like a business. We need to interact with it like a business. This is the neoliberal perspective that we've encountered with other thinkers like Wendy Brown. I mean, it's a critique of neoliberalism, of course. But privatization, and this isn't a point they make, but it's a point I want to make. Privatization of government services has the unintended effect of making business into part of our government. And that's what's happened. If you feel like you're being now governed by the likes of Google, for instance, it's because you are. But prior to this, the advances in privatization of various social services extended the government's arm, made business the arm of government. There was this merging and melding of government and so-called private business. But the ultimate effect of this merger is that business becomes less private. It becomes managerial. It becomes part of government. And so now you have, YouTube or Facebook deciding what can and cannot be said. And in effect, the First Amendment is under assault. When these things are privatized, when they're left up to the private business or the corporation, the marketplace, the only vote that people have then is the vote with their pocketbook, which is let's just say I don't want to discourage it, but I don't think that it is easy to influence the entire system by deciding what you want to purchase and what you don't want to purchase. However, these guys are going to argue that for a lot of reasons, beyond that, it is good to try to limit one's exposure to the consumer culture. They're talking about neoliberalism here when they say the market ideology has a near religious trust in management and efficiency and a good interstate highway system. With automation, or management, what Ellul would call technique, you get a depersonalization of relationships. Institutions become the actors, the people within them or the people who depend upon them are interchangeable from their perspective. And they end that first chapter by pointing out that a culture of covenant, the alternative that they want to propose, a culture of covenant and neighborliness depends on trust. And trust has been very degraded by this, the consumer culture, by the institutionalization, the trust in process, the privatization. We don't have to trust our friends. We therefore don't, and our neighbors, we therefore have lost some ability to gauge whether we can trust them. Trust is built on a track record. It involves basically finding out what people are made of by seeing whether they follow through on what they say they're going to do. But of course, if you've become isolated, depersonalized, and you don't even ask the people you know, if you know very many, or your neighbors, etc., for things, you can't figure out whether to trust them because you don't have a track record with them. So you can kind of get the feeling that they're heading towards advocating a certain type of localism. Say the point is to overcome our isolation, to discover a way where we begin to have affection for the land and the commons, meaning that which we can share, including each other as far as, our thoughts, our time, our abilities, our skills, and our property. They say when communities are fully functioning, when they are doing all the things they can do themselves, then we can rediscover what systems we actually need and what for. So, they're basically just saying there that these systems, part governmental, part supposed private business, have taken over areas of life that we could do for ourselves. And if we depart from this, it's got to be by recreating community. And only when we do that, only when we do more for each other and become more self-reliant thereby, would we be able to know what institutions we really need. All right, well, I hope that interests you. I'm going to talk more about this book. There's a lot of ideas. It's a short book. I'd really encourage you, if you kind of like what these guys are saying or you're curious about them, to get it. It's something like 100 pages long. I'll put the link up to it. I'll probably spend like 1 or 2 more videos on some of these ideas. All right, bye.